Hi, this is Brent Feldman. We are back with another episode of Mix and Matchbox. I am here with Shannon Waller. She is an entrepreneurial teamwork strategist. Hi, Shannon. How are you doing?
Hi, Brent. Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me on.
Definitely. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, I'm really looking forward to jumping into the questions here. And, the first one I have, kind of off the bat, and, maybe this was, an update that you let me know that needs to be made to the LinkedIn profile, but you have had a singular experience listed on LinkedIn. And but it does sound like you've kind of been in this role for a long time and helping people as a strategic coach. So what kind of led you to being part of Strategic Coach, and what do you think is its staying power?
It's a great question. We are coming up in November of when you're recording this, 2024, to our 35th year in business. And I joined in July of 1991. Which was a long time ago. Now, I was working somewhere else before, so you can do the math. I'm at least that old. So I worked for another company who's, I always wanted to be a management consultant. That's really what my goal in life was to be. And ever since I went to school, I was always passionate about people in business. I think business is the absolute best place in the world to grow personally and professionally. If you want to grow as a human being, I actually think business is the place more than anything else, because you have to grow yourself in order to grow your company, and you get feedback pretty quickly from the marketplace. Doesn't cut you a lot of slack. So I worked for another company and I ran training programs, kind of got my feet wet, learned a little bit about what consultants did, but they mostly work with big companies. And then one of our lines of business was seminar rooms. And Strategic Coach at the time was Bab Smith and Dan Sullivan, who are co-founders, co-partners, and husband and wife as well. They needed a great place to do it because they only had an administrative office in Toronto. And so they rented out our rooms, and their clients were so different than the corporate training clients that came in. So I noticed that. Anyway, long story short, expressed some interest, came to see a presentation of Dan's, and the salesperson called me up at the end because I had wiggled my way at an invitation. And she asked me two really interesting questions. She said, "Did you enjoy the presentation by Dan?" I'm like, fascinating. All the stuff I had known in the world, but he put it together and integrated it in a completely different way. And then she asked me the key question, which was, "Are you happy with what you're doing?" And out of my mouth pops, "No, I'm bored." 5 weeks later, I had joined Strategic Coach as a salesperson under her, calculated how much I need to live on, forgot taxes. Not very smart. Very lean first couple of years. Anyway, started off in sales, eventually learned I was excellent but not unique at sales. I can make a very good living. Realized what I really want to do was coach, and through a couple cool circumstances, that's what I've been doing since 1994.
That's fun.
Yeah, actually, no, 1995. Next year is 30 years. So that's kind of crazy. Like, who knew that was even a possibility? So I created the Strategic Coach team programs. It's not something that Dan and Babs were ever going to do, because my passion is, how can I help team members in entrepreneurial companies be happier? How can I help entrepreneurs be happier with their teams? Because there's always this chasm. Forget even a distance. It's a chasm between entrepreneurs and team members. And so my passion in life and my raison d'etre has been try and bridge that gap. And I keep coming up with it's a never ending issue. So I'm never going to run out of work is what I've decided.
That's great. That's fantastic. Yeah, exactly. It's nice to kind of fall into those things that you just love to do. And and that's awesome. Well, as you kind of mentioned, you've had more than 30 years of experience, coaching entrepreneurs. In the early and late stages of owning and running a business, what are things, that you find consistently happening, as you're helping people through things, are there any through lines between early and late stages?
There are, and it's interesting because it keeps getting refined. The biggest challenge at the beginning is you are jack of all trades, master of some, I will say, not all, but master of some. So that's kind of the beginning. And we call this it's really a trap, because you get trapped being a rugged individual. You think the thinking there is, I can do it better myself. So early stage, or sometimes it's interesting, entrepreneurs hit that when they go into a brand new market, brand new location. They default back to that, even though they've kind of learned how to build a team as they went through things. If they're put into a brand new situation again, they default back to being a rugged individual. So that is the biggest challenge at the beginning, which is not recognizing my personal personal law, thousands of years old, know thyself. Like, know what you're great at, know what gives you energy, know who you're passionate about being a hero to. Like, just have done that thinking about your thinking, as Dan calls it, and clue into that. And then surround yourself with people who are brilliant at the things that you're not. They're love to do and are skilled at the things that you don't love to do. So that's, the shift from rugged individualism to unique teamwork and breaking through what we call the ceiling of complexity is to put that team around you. But then I think entrepreneurs to go to the late stage, they kind of need to keep reinventing themselves and helping their team stay on that line too. Because if you don't give it love and attention as it grows, people kind of get comfortable and then they settle into that ceiling. And then again, you're not growing. So keeping growing and leaning hard into what we call your unique ability is really the through line that we find has people be successful.
That's cool. That's fantastic. And actually, and you mentioned that, kind of age old, rule of like, knowing oneself. And actually there's this book that I love to recommend to people, and it's Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. Yeah. And anyway, and so it's one that I kind of put out there only because, and it's an old book.
No, it's not new. I love it.
It has really good lessons and really just, making sure that, you kind of understand your abilities, leaning into other people's abilities. So anyway, just one that it came to mind as you were saying that. And I always love, kind of like finding those kind of common points. Well, this is interesting. As you coach others, do you ever have to be your own coach as it's your business theoretically at the end of the day too?
It's true. I treat it as my company. It's really, really, really hard to coach yourself. It just is. I mean, if you think about the top athletes and entertainers, they all have coaches. Now, here's the funny thing. When I first started selling Strategic Coach, 1991, 26 years old, I had to explain that Strategic Coach was not a bus line. I'm like, oh yeah, that is another word for buses coach. I'm like, oh my Lord. No, but then I have to say, because business coaches were not a thing. Life coaches did not exist. Let's be really clear. So the top people have coaches. It is hard to coach yourself. Although I have to say, Dan Sullivan, who's just a genius at coming up with ways to help you coach yourself. We do it through tools and exercises. And there are certain questions you can ask yourself so that is actually the way to do it. And people have writing practices and journaling, but when you ask yourself questions, that is actually the way to coach yourself. Now, the scope of the questions and what questions you're asking yourself, you might want to get some food for that. And we've got a whole library. I think we have a goal of producing 100 books in 100 quarters. We're on book number 40 right now, which is kind of cool. And I joined on book 2. So we're doing that for a long time. And so some of the questions that are one of my favorite questions, and I coach this to team members as well as entrepreneurs, is if you're stuck with something, how can I be more resourceful about this? That's just a great question. Another simple question is, what do I actually want? Often we're aware of what we don't want, but what do I actually want? We've got questions around your future goals 10 years from now, 25 years from now. What is my unique ability? What do I love to do most and do best? And what gives me absolutely no energy at all? And if I put in the time and effort, I do not get the result. I mean, these are all questions you can use, but I have to say, sitting yourself down and asking yourself questions doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
We got stuff to do that's on our calendar. So putting yourself in an environment, you can take yourself out to a coffee shop. It's not a bad idea. But for me, literally where my office is 50 feet away from our workshop room. And it's like the thoughts I have in my office are kind of more tactical. I go into the workshop room with the workshop and my buddies, my other entrepreneurs and the coach, and I think different thoughts. So there's something about putting yourself in an environment that pulls that out of you and has you think bigger with other people who also are thinking bigger. You think differently. The long answer to coaching yourself, but I can do it. It's okay. I'm really good at coaching other people, and I'm good at being coached by other people. I can coach myself in a pinch is kind of the bottom line.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, and a sage piece of advice on, like, kind of asking yourself questions. I think it's, maybe easy for people to kind of get caught in their own thoughts, and sometimes spiral, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, that doesn't lead to anything productive. But really having a concerted question to yourself
Mhm.
can maybe help focus that energy. So I really appreciate that recommendation. But I also think, a service, maybe like yours, is also invaluable in the sense that it is that outside lens, the outside, perspective on your own issues that, you really need at not just one point in time, but many points
Yeah.
in time, especially as, you are developing as a person. As you mentioned, you're kind of growing your organization. All of those changes really can create different constraints and
Mhm.
in ways in which you may need to, think about problems.
Yeah, and to that point, it's like none of us can do this in a vacuum,
Hmm.
right? Like if we're smart. We got stuff figured out. There's lots we can do, lots we can learn. We've got good brains, but still, I've got blind spots. Everyone I know has them. And it's interesting, like, at least for a strategic coach, we don't point out your blind spots, but through questions, you'll figure it out. And what I find incredibly helpful is when we do tons of small group discussions. It's like I'll get feedback from other people. It's like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I'm like, no. Right. And we do a ton of profiles. So that points out some areas where you don't have mental energy or emotional energy. And not that you should try and fix that, by the way.
Hmm.
You don't need to go to counseling for any of these things. But it's more like, let's surround yourself with people, again, who are complementary. Who, not how, is very much our strategy for that. So yeah, I think you can just grow in a much easier, more well-rounded, less painful way when you can do it in that kind of a regular structure.
That's awesome. Well, great. Well, it looks like you're an advocate for having an executive assistant. And wow, I agree that when you're a busy professional, if there's work that can be, just delegated,
Yeah.
to help you be more productive, that is a big benefit.
Mhm.
So what is the point that you think it becomes either necessary or critical to have that executive assistant type of help?
Okay. I'll tell you a story. It's my own executive assistant story. And when we're talking, so I'm just had the absolute pleasure and joy of co-authoring a book with Stephen Nooner, who's one of our associate coaches, and his business partner, Brian Casson, called Superpowered. And we really did a deep dive into entrepreneurial executive assistants. They have a company that sources them. I created the program in 1995 called Strategic Assistant. So we both have a passion for those people, and we have a passion for the people they serve, which are entrepreneurs. So it's interesting because bottom line answer, Brent, as soon as you can, as soon as you can afford the 2-week paycheck, hire that person. No,
Mhm.
don't pay your rent, pay your mortgage, do those things, eat, make sure you do that. But here's how I know that. So I was a salesperson with Coach, and another person hired me. Her name was Susan. And anyway, Susan and I shared a part-time assistant. So I had like a quarter of a who.
Mhm.
Let's be clear. And so it wasn't a lot, but I was in a scarcity mindset at the time. And she wanted to hire somebody else and said, hey, can you take over this person yourself? And I was like, I don't know. And I debated about it for over a week.
Hmm.
And finally, she's like, Shannon, like, you're going to do this or not? And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. Scared, you know what? Right? Just scared crapless about this. And then her name was Anon Kim. Brilliant. She's so smart. And 3 weeks later, I said, how soon can you go full time? The leverage was so incredible. And I didn't know, and that was going from a quarter of a person to half a person. Like, you think it wouldn't make much difference. Now, when it's the right person, the right who, it's kind of amazing. But she was so dedicated, so smart. And I'm a very in my profiles, I'm kind of an extreme. I'm all of one and nothing of something else. It pretty much doesn't matter what profile I'm talking about. It's both also true. And so she just filled in so many of the gaps. And I saw I could sleep better at night. I wasn't working as late. I made more money. I was better on my sales calls. I was lined up to talk to the right people. I was less squirrel, bright, shiny object syndrome. All the things just got so much better when Anon started supporting me. And then she actually grew to become her own salesperson. And we placed her with that. But that has happened so many times over the years for me. It's ridiculous. And so as soon as people can, we actually just had our very first ever Coach Con, which was super fun. And I was on a great panel with my friends Emily Morgan and Alec Broadfoot, and both of them supply, very capable who's to entrepreneurs. And we all agreed to a person that the first person you want to support before you hire like a COO, integrator, second in command person, you basically need an executive assistant. So it just is such personal leverage for you. And we don't realize how much time we're wasting on emails and how much mental energy goes into that, and just organizing your calendar and booking flights, and all the little minutia, which is so critical, all the follow-up things. And if you don't, you're not a very good business person. But when you've got someone to help lighten that load and make sure you don't miss your son's soccer game or your girls' volleyball game or your anniversary or date night or whatever it is, your life gets so much better almost instantly. And then you become better able to do what you're unique at. Mm-hmm. So again, long answer to that question, but it's just so transformational to have that person.
That's great. I'm a believer. I completely agree. So that's great. Do you have a recommendation on hiring a VA versus someone domestically or even locally in this role? And the reason why I ask is because, we've had experience with both. And, and I think that, having, the virtual assistant, especially at sometimes, the cost competitive, rates that they're at, can be extremely attractive. But, are there things that you kind of balance in your mind of pros and cons about, those different types of people that may fit that role?
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple different perspectives, and I think it's very individual, bottom line. But there are a couple things I learned in the process of co-authoring Superpowered, which blew my mind. So I'll share that. So let's just talk about having an in-person assistant. Her name is Katrina. Was just talking to her right before you. We were corresponding, all the things. So she's the one who basically manages me. I do not manage her. Let's be super clear on this. She managed me. So she makes sure I'm where I'm supposed to be, when I'm supposed to be there, prepared with all the things. I've got all the notes from our correspondence in the right places so I can be ready. And she'll do that. So we actually met. So she's local to me where I am in Toronto, and we don't live all that far apart. So last week we met at a coffee shop. Dreamy, so much fun. Yesterday we met at the office, also fun. But we also do most of our work remotely, and I travel a lot, right? So to my mind, she could be completely remote. And I could just meet up with her occasionally wherever. Like that's very doable. It is, I'm an in-person person a lot, and I'm one of those huggy humans. So I do appreciate that. But then also working with Stephen and Ryan, they were looking for VAs, executive VAs. This is not a, your man in India kind of thing. We're not talking about that. Not the very tactical type stuff. And so they used to source people from the US. And what they found was people in the US, and I'm sure this is not true of every company, but that the assistant position is seen as a stepping stone, and people didn't want to stay in that. So they actually moved all of their sourcing to the Philippines. So it turns out, well, obviously there's a great price issue. I also got to contribute to another book on global teams by Sunny Kayla, and Philippines and India. It's like a thing. It's like it's not as new as we might think, or weird as we might think. And what they found is that for the people in the Philippines, this position has status. This position has prestige, and people are very happy being assistants, and people are very, this is something that they're not trying to get out of. They're not demeaning the role. Hopefully the person hiring them is neither. And so it actually ends up working so brilliantly well. The other thing is, if you do local, you're constrained to the people in a 30-mile radius, depending on traffic. And there's a lot of traffic in Toronto, just saying. So you're really constrained on that, and that is an issue. And if you're like most entrepreneurs, you're pretty mobile. So why do you care where they're at? Do you know what I mean? So I think the arguments for remote are strong. Let me just put it that way, because we're moving around. We want someone to be stationary in our office, and we're not there. Doesn't really make sense. And then when you can find people who are very talented, very well trained, including in your vernacular, speak English beautifully, and are dedicated to you and see this as an aspirational role, there's some strong wins there. So it's interesting. I've learned a lot. And I'm always tapped into team things and what the current reality is, but this is a thing. Like this makes so much sense for so many people, and it's been incredibly successful.
That's awesome. Well, and maybe even to tap into an earlier point you were making, if the cost competitive, kind of value presents itself to you in order to make that move earlier into getting an executive assistant, does that just even make, more rational sense that you should, execute and just go for it that way? And, if there is a reason to change in the future, maybe make that change, but really as soon as possible, kind of just move towards getting an executive assistant.
Yeah. And I don't want people to have to kiss too many frogs. That's the thing. So make sure that you are clear on what you want. Strategic Coach has an awesome tool for that called the Impact Filter, which is available at strategiccoach.com. And so getting clear on what you want. One of the biggest issues that people have is they hire someone, but they're so swamped. They kind of like, if you were in person, they'd run out of their office, throw stuff at the person, and then run back to their meeting with, like, we call it delegation drive-by. That's what I call it, and that's not a really great setup for success. So be clear on what you want. People have tons of fears. We actually talk about that in the book. But I have to say, and the best assistant, well, the first really full-time assistant I had kind of more recently that I didn't share with somebody else. Her name is Nicole Pitcher, based in Toronto. She trained me on how to be supportable, if that's a word.
Yeah.
She coached me. So she would communication issues, and we're dear, dear friends. She's moved on to her next career now. But she trained me on how to be a good person with whom to work. And I think that's key. It's not just on them. It's also on us. You can't be helter-skelter all over the place, just giving them dribs and drabs. That's not a commitment to having a true partnership, which is what it can be.
Definitely. Wow. That walks right into the next question so well. So I actually, that's perfect. What would you say makes the difference between a productive and unproductive executive assistant?
Oh, so many things. And so I'm so productive, unproductive, successful, unsuccessful. So when if I'm just talking about the assistant, one of the things and this may or may not be a popular opinion, I think intelligence matters. And I came late to the intelligence party. Because we profile for personality, we profile using something called the Colby profile for striving instincts. And I'm thinking everyone's intelligence is probably pretty good. But if you've got the right emotional makeup of someone and the right striving instincts, and they're still not working out, there's only one thing left. I actually tell one of my favorite stories, and made it into the book, is about my friend Eric. And he came into the workshop. He was new. He was talking to one of my colleagues about team issues. And I could just tell by talking with this guy had a very, very sharp brain. But he was complaining about his team because people just kept flaming out. And I walked, I'm like, and I was kind of sassy about it. I'm not sure why, but I just was. I'm like, Eric, you are wicked smart. You have to be working with people who are also wicked smart. And I walked away. I think it was his first workshop, poor guy. Anyway. First or second. But that stuck with him. And since then, actually, Nicole's helped him put together a brilliant team of people who can keep pace. So I think not appreciating how smart you are, how fast moving your brain is and your ideas, and wanting someone who will keep pace with you. So I think that matters. Both Nicole and Katrina are brilliant, smarter than I am. And they easily get bored. So one of my success criteria for people that work with me is if they say they were bored in the previous role. I'm like, oh, good, because that is the one thing I can promise you, you will not be bored working with me. So I think that's one. Not giving people free rein to do things their way. So they're probably much more process oriented and skilled at that and trained than you are. So that would, not letting them do their thing, micromanaging them would be one. Not giving them the big picture would be another problem that would lead to lack of productivity. So don't know why they're doing what they're doing or where you're trying to get to. That would be key. Not resourcing them. So not giving them the tools, the access to resources, technology, all of those things. Those are some of the key ones in terms of making sure that the relationship is productive. But really, it all comes down to communication and regular communication, like daily. Could be 5-15 minutes. Katrina and I met this morning before we got on this, and we connect every day unless I'm gone somewhere, because just to retune, we are constantly on that through line. We're kind of just, zigzagging across the line to make sure that things are on track and where they need to be. And I need a lot of management, so that's part of it. But that communication is the number one success criteria for having a productive relationship and a productive VA.
Cool. That's great. Those are really helpful points. I guess, this may be, tough, but are there any things that you ever feel like are things that should never get off your plate? And I've heard of things that, where the matrices, where they, draw them and you're like, is it something that you're good at or not good at or like to do or don't like to do?
Yeah.
But, are there things that you just feel like are not things that are cut out for an executive assistant to do?
Not so much for the role. But there actually is one of our rules at Coach is please do not delegate your unique ability.
Okay.
I had a client who somehow mistook or misread. We can take responsibility for that. Because Shannon, my sales went down. This is coming back for his next quarterly workshop. And I'm like, and I just had an inkling. I'm like, you didn't delegate sales, did you? She goes, yeah, you told me to delegate everything. I'm like, yeah, except genius. Delegate everything except genius. I'm like, please take that back because you are genius at it. And there's no one in your company who's even remotely close. So anyway, fortunately, the sales went right back up. I was horrified. Don't delegate what you love to do and do best. That would just be silly. So that would be number one, because first of all, you'll be miserable. So that's never good. And you won't make as much money. So that is one. Gosh, I know executive assistants that do so much. I can't mention any one thing. So number one, don't give away something that you love to do and are best at. It's usually, my baton's in my briefcase. I literally have been carrying it around. The issue is not so much literally, I have a baton.
You do have a baton.
I'm not kidding. Because it's more that entrepreneurs have a death grip, and team leaders too. No one's actually immune to this. We have a death grip on the darn baton. If this is what I call unique ability relay race, letting go is way harder. Okay. Now, I will say to your point that having checks and balances, please have a dashboard to know how your finances are doing. Sales, profit, it's not that, do I want you doing all the accounting and bookkeeping? No. However, please have a dashboard that has the checks and balances built in so that you know what's going on. So don't abdicate that. Don't abdicate oversight is probably, I've actually never said that before. It's a good one.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. Yeah.
I know, right? So don't abdicate oversight, but in terms of any particular task, if you don't love it, aren't good at it, it is room for someone, and a really good strategic assistant, or, in our case, a superpowered assistant is brilliant. But then there's the only other thing that comes to mind is there's certain people relationships that you wouldn't hand over expect that person to manage your entire client base unless there's only 5 people. But that would be giving away what you're really unique at. So I think making sure that you work as a partner with someone and that both of you are freed up to do what you're best at, that really is the goal. And frankly, sky's the limit on what those specific things are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. That's fantastic. Okay, great. Excellent. As a topic, of, this is kind of related to executive assistants, to another area that you focus on, which is team. And, I know you touched on it just a little bit, but, personally, I feel like who you select to be on your team is, maybe, if not the most, critical element of success.
Yes.
It's important for entrepreneurs to pick, people with their, or actually, is it important for entrepreneurs to pick people with their same abilities or ones with diverse abilities in order to, sort of extend themselves? So, is it something they're already good at or something that they're not good at and, need to take off their plate?
Great question. My bottom line is yes.
Okay.
It kind of goes back to what you want. What do you need? There are some people who are brilliant and have a ton of mental energy for fact finding, organizing, all of those things. In Colby profile, Colby MO language, it'd be fact finder follow through. Now, if you can do that at the level of your calendar, your flights, and the mail, or you can look at the level of analyzing your client's data and coming up with brand new systems and organization for them. Which one's going to make you more money? Right? So yes, then you kind of want to you do want a mini me to focus on using that same type of mental energy on those tasks that, frankly, Cameron Herold has this great quote. I've always known the quote. I finally figured out who said it. Cameron Herold has this brilliant quote. He says, if you don't have an assistant, you are one.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell my clients, I'm like, yeah, and you're way too highly paid for the quality of work you're doing. It's ridiculous. So yes, you want to free yourself up. Now, for me, I need someone who's my complement, because that fact find and follow through, I can get 3 pieces of information and move. My processor plan has 2 steps, start and stop, right? Not much in between. If you want me to riff in the moment, I can do that for days, so I need someone who's going to, backstop all of the organization and structure and information, because that's not my mental energy. Am I smart? Yes. Can I do it? Yes. Do I want to? Absolutely not. And will I? No. I actually just so this is why Colby is not what you want to do. It's what you will, won't, or are willing to do. So, and just for anyone listening, it's kolbe.com. I know on every transcript I've seen from AI, they spell it like the cheese, and Colby A profiles on kolbe.com, KOLBE is useful. And so I would I personally would always find a compliment. I usually look for a compliment. Now, I will say there's one caveat to that, and this, hopefully not getting into too many weeds, is that for someone who has a lot of mental energy for being very specific, Colby, that would be like an 8 fact finder. It is really hard for you to delegate to anyone who is less than that, because you are going to go back and double check their work. So now there's 2 of you. And if they fall short, you are never letting that go. You are never letting go of that baton. So there's a few nuances to that. But yeah, so if you know yourself, and I'm an advocate for profiles, as you can tell. And then you can find your compliments so easily. You can save a lot of time, kiss fewer frogs, all the things, when you have deep knowledge of yourself and are aware of the type of mental energy, as well as intelligence and background and personality that you're looking for. So yes, mostly a compliment, and then occasionally a clone. How's that sound?
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Simple formulas, I think that'll hopefully be easier for people to keep in mind. And that is good, because it's tough rationalizing that decision, whether it's your first hire or your 50th, like where do you need that sort of help? And I feel like, something that people can sort of use as a guidepost is really helpful.
One other example, and Stephen told the story in the book, Superpowered, pardon me. You go from super stressed to superpowered, is that when to hire someone, even just circle back to that, is when you become the bottleneck, right? When you become the bottleneck, because you're dropping stuff, forgetting, sitting in your inbox forever. And his team, he had support for all of his other team members except for himself. So they did an intervention and go, Stephen, you're the problem. We love you, and you need to hire someone to support you. We are well looked after. You are the one that needs more support. And he was like, okay. So that was part of his journey and the whole thing too, just to make it very tangible.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this kind of bridges off of team, but how you treat your team is definitely a big part of retention, and retention it's incredibly important, and it's also how you can make the most out of who you have on your team as well. What lessons are you usually coaching through your clients to help them avoid mistakes in how they treat their teams? You've kind of already touched a little bit on things like here and there, that delegating and how you address things that are on your plate and working with them. But are there any sort of big lessons that you can talk about of how you should treat your team?
I have books written on that.
Too many to cover in a couple minutes.
That's okay. No. I love solving teamwork problems. Actually, it's kind of funny. I think the number one, I came to this conclusion actually only about a month ago, is that the only type of teamwork I want to be involved in is one where we're partners. I want a partnership relationship. In fact, I don't use the title assistant. When we're hiring, yes, we have to use the title executive assistant. But and I clued into this even before we hired Nicole. So that's 11 years ago now. It's like, she was always my support partner. Now, she had a lot of strategic thinking strengths, so she was my strategic support partner. Katrina is my support partner. But you see the partner part? I want to be freed up to do what I'm great at, and I'm going to let you do what you're great at. And let's just make sure our puzzle pieces fit well together, because I don't want someone who's like, oh, asking permission. I'm like, yeah, this is your area of expertise. You know what the hell you're doing. I don't, right? Like, I don't want to be managing someone. I want someone to organize me. And there's a deep amount, when you have a partner, there's an amount of respect. There's an amount of accountability. There's responsibility. There is honoring of one another. There's gratitude. It would be another one. So I think if someone has a partnership mindset, that means your odds of teamwork working are massively improved when you have the right who. If you don't, there's a whole other story for that. But I think if you can have a partnership mindset and realize, oh, I have to give you one of my favorite quotes. And it relates to Colby, but kind of relates to almost everything. And it was from one of our clients. His name is Peter. He goes, before I knew about Colby, substitute in your favorite thing, I thought everyone was just like me, only not as good. That is not a partnership.
That's a little toxic.
Just a bit. But we think other people could, would, and should be like us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they ain't. Right?
Yeah.
But if you can appreciate the differences and see how we can work together better, that one simple shift that's why I'm like, know what your strengths are, know what your non-strengths are, fill in the gaps with other people's strengths. You will be a great person to work with and for, but really with. And then you'll have a lot to contribute to other people too. If you come into it with any other attitude or mindset, no promises. In fact, I can guarantee it probably won't work. And really great people want to be that partner. Yeah. They want to contribute. They want actually purpose for their great talents. And so if you create the opportunity and the opening for that, they'll jump in. And if you don't, you will not be finding them in the marketplace.
Definitely. Oh, wow. That's cool. And this aligns very much with like a philosophy and just, the way I kind of like speak about, people on our team. They are people that I work with, not work for me, and,
right?
and yeah, we're all in this together in order to like, make sure that, the work happens, that clients are satisfied, all that sort of stuff. So I really appreciate, that approach, that it is a partnership. And actually even the retitling of kind of like how you refer to that person who is your, executive assistant. And I think that, and you touched on this a little bit when you're talking about, Filipino VAs, and like, sometimes that role does get diminished in terms of like, what it means, not only as a role in general, but what it means to people, or what it can mean to executives. Like, right. And you don't want it to carry, that a negative stigma at all, whether it be for that person or for somebody else you may introduce them to. Yeah. So, and it's funny, I find myself introducing, an assistant sometimes just by name as opposed to by title, in order to alleviate that stigma. And so I really appreciate you touching on that, because I feel like that's, an important value point in how you not only, appreciate that person, but how you treat the relationship too.
Yes. One of my very, very, very favorite parts of this book, I was talking to Katrina about it yesterday, is the part where we have letters to our assistants. They're kind of love letters, to be perfectly honest. They're gratitude letters. And there are letters from our assistants in the book. Each of them wrote for the three of us. And the thing that's so stellar, and Nicole, again, was the first one to train me on this. There are some people who know that they are here to support other people. That is their jam. And here's the thing, I realized they're really picky about who they'll support. So I feel honored when someone chooses to support me and what I'm up to. I'm like, oh my God, you're going to put your brain and your incredible talents to support me. I'm like, thank you. I do not take it for granted. I do not feel entitled. And support is a thing. Some of us are meant to be out, breaking new ground, trying stuff out, falling on our faces occasionally. That's us. That's what gives us energy. Lord knows we need other people behind us picking us up occasionally. Hey, your line's straight, it's crooked, like whatever. And if you can appreciate that, and they will take care of you, we are blessed to have that capability. And again, there are people, and this is measurable by objective measures, not just people saying it. Support is a thing. There are a lot of really great supportive people out there. Are you someone worthy of supporting? I think is the question we should be asking, not like, oh, just expecting it or demanding it or some of the other weird things that people do. So yeah, this is an esteemed position in my world. And then if we can help other people appreciate that too for themselves, sometimes assistants demean themselves. So that also happens. So if we can help elevate this into a partnership, we'll have done good in the world as far as I'm concerned.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, I just have one last question for you, actually. And it's really with, maybe one, big gap for entrepreneurs really being their own time,
Right.
and I think that is something that a lot of people need some of that back in order to do, that big thinking, just as
Yes,
you're,
they really
and like,
do.
yeah, and taking those leaps and doing all that stuff that they need to be doing, and you touch on this too about giving direction can be, the hardest part. And you don't want to, I think you said drive-by delegation,
Drive-by allegations.
yeah, that was great. But giving direction can be the hardest part of onboarding people when they take over activities, sometimes putting them in what can be an endless loop of like, oh, I threw all this stuff at them. It didn't really work out. Let's try it again. Threw all this stuff, and kind of getting in that cycle. What's the remedy to get out of that?
Patience. We actually lay out, and this is not my expertise. This is Ryan and Steven's, like a whole 3-month onboarding. Work 1, month 1, month 2, month 3, crawl, walk, run. It's a thing. Communication, inbox, having people shadow you is actually one, like even in Zoom meetings, we have our AI assistants there. Why can't we have a real human? Do you know what I mean? So have them shadow you so they can get to know you, share something about yourself every time, build the trust. I'm not asking people to just hand it over and go automatically you're trustworthy. You don't know the person yet. That doesn't happen anywhere in life. Why would it be any different here? But have patience, be open with yourself, recognize which fears are groundless and which ones are real, would be another one. And it's interesting because, and I'm pretty committed to doing this quickly because I don't like to waste time. It's either going to work or it's not, right? I've kissed a few frogs. So it's one of those things where just be decisive, be clear, state what you want. I have one expression, and again, we use it with a lot of our tools, but what does it look like when it's done and done well?
Yeah.
Really articulate. And then the only other thing I would add is when. Because if when is 3 weeks from now and there's something else that's in 20 minutes, clearly the 20-minute deadline is going to, take, or if you never state a deadline, that thing keeps going down the road, right? So really, what does it look like when it's done and done well? And by when would be even just that simple way of giving direction and thinking that through with your person. Because sometimes we say stuff, I'm like, oh, do I really want that? So you'll get smarter and clearer as you do this. And don't hang on to it until then. Say, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. It's really important. Can I talk this through with you? Like we don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to clean the house before the house cleaner comes. They actually will have a better sense of timing and organization and research than you will. That's their jam. So I think just really being willing to put the time in, watch for the progression, crawl, walk, run. We've got orientation and training books. There's huge orientation and training in Superpowered for how to do that. Other people have it as well in terms of how to get someone up to speed, but you have to be willing. You have to be willing to not be that rugged individual anymore and be willing to actually graciously pass the baton so that it works. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, actually, you know what? I think that is, you've had some fantastic advice. And I really do feel like, that book may be helpful for anybody who is either on the fence about getting an executive assistant. So, feel free if you want to, mention the title one more time so people can go find it. And then I'll put a link to it in the podcast here too.
Super awesome. Okay. So got here. So Superpowered, the secret that helps every entrepreneur eliminate the suck. Because frankly, it's there, 10 times their impact, and have more fun in work and life. This is a 360-degree improvement is what you can look forward to. Again, with the right with the right superpowered assistant. And that takes taking what is a standard level of teamwork up into a whole other dimension. And that's what I think is so exciting. This is a maximizer version of having an entrepreneurial executive assistant. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Shannon, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been great.
It's been really fun, Brett. I love it. Yeah, so please come check it out. We're excited about it, as you can tell, and it's fun to get so many years of wisdom put into one place to make it available for people so that people can become super powered and not super stressed.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Brent.
All right. This has been another episode of Mix and Matchbox. I'm your host, Brent Feldman. We will be back soon with more content. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.